Well, hello everyone. Welcome, welcome. We've got a great crowd on this call today. I'm excited because this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. Strategies for assessing your organization's operations. And as many of you are operations professionals in your organizations or executive directors, which means you're everything professionals in your organizations, um, you know that we are challenged as nonprofit leaders to be as efficient as possible to get every last bit of efficacy out of our organizations so that we're good stewards of our donors' dollars and our contributions. So that's why I'm so excited that we're having this webinar today and bringing in Miriam Dix, who for a couple of years was our facilitator for our Operations Peer Network, and now has come back to lead this wonderful workshop for us. And I will turn it over to Miriam.
Well, good afternoon. And I am so excited to see you all. I put this mic here just in case you can't hear me. Can you hear me okay, or is it too much? You can hear me fine? Perfect, perfect, perfect. I want to make sure that you don't miss any good content. But I'm so glad to be here with you. And I missed working with a lot of you. I see a lot of friendly and familiar faces out there. So, hey, good to see you again. It's been a little while. Now, today, and let me introduce myself for those who don't know me. So I'm Miriam Dix, owner of 180 Management Group. We are a management consulting firm. We recently relocated from Greenville, South Carolina to Annapolis, Maryland. So we're in Maryland, hence I'm wearing a sweater today. Our goal is really to help organizations come alongside our nonprofit mission-driven organizations to help you to perform as efficiently as possible when it comes to your operations and being able to really perform well when it comes to achieving your mission. And so I'm going to pull up some slides here today. Let's see here. Probably should share my screen first. Let's do that. And now that I'm sharing my screen, let's go ahead and get into our presentation mode. Here we go. Now, these slides, I was asking Desmond earlier, so the recording will be available for you, and the slides will be, of course, a part of the recording. If there's anything else that I can provide for you, please let Desmond know. She'll get with me, and I'll make sure to give you what you need. All right, so today we want to talk about strategies for assessing your organization's operations. I'm going to work through a couple of strategies for you, and then at the end, leave some time for questions, okay? So, strategies for assessing your organization's operations. Now, this to me is a very, it can be a very touchy subject for some, mostly because, as Ben said, about the strain that organizations find themselves under when it comes to operations. And when you're trying to be efficient with operations, you don't want to get into what they call the starvation cycle. I don't know if you've heard that term before, right? Which is basically, you're trying to meet this goal of not having overhead be more than 25% of your total budget, and you're trying to cut out so many things that you realize that you're cutting out the meat of your operations, and it's hard to really be efficient when you don't have enough. Like there is a point at which you can be efficient as an organization, and you start to lose that efficiency because you don't have enough people, you don't have enough staff, you don't have enough hands doing the work. And so it really can be at the very touchy subject. But we're going to try to get some information to you today that should help you with identifying ways that you can assess your organization, and then some strategies for being more efficient. So my little handy dandy. Here we go. Operations. The very first thing that I'd like to do is really just set the tone for operations and what operations is. Because if I talk to three different people, I'm going to get three different answers, right, about what operations is. Now, I will say that Together SC on their website, I think, does a really good job of describing who is a part of the operations team. It talks about folks who are working in HR and IT and finance, and just sort of general back office administration. All those folks are considered operations professionals. But when we actually try to identify or define what operations is, it's very, very simple. Operations is a set of activities that an organization engages in to produce a good or a service. And then sometimes you'll see that particular definition that says produce value. So a set of activities that an organization engages in to produce value. And I really wanted to harp on that value piece a little bit just because operations is valuable. Many times, many of us who work in that operations space, the work that we do is not seen as valuable work. It's more like, you become the chief fire putter outer. And that's what everyone comes to you for, is just to put out the fires. But there's value in what you do. You are bringing, the necessary, coordinating the necessary task that it takes to actually produce the good or the service, in many cases, for your particular community or constituents. And so I wanted to just say that to you to make sure that we're all on the same page with operations is valuable. We shouldn't be the red-headed stepchildren that, no one really wants to play with because we're always talking about processes, we're always talking about policy, but we are valuable to our organization. And keeping that in mind, I want to make sure that we were on that same page, breathing some life into you, because I know that the work is hard and I know that it can be very stressful. But when it comes to assessing your operations, there are three things that I think you should know. When you assess operations, you want to know if the activities, remember we said that operations is a set of activities that an organization engages in to produce a good or a service. You want to know if those activities are aligned with strategy. You also want to know if activities are efficient. And then you also want to know that activities are effective. Now, you may be asking yourself, because I had to ask this question too. I think I've always confused efficiency with effectiveness, and those are two different terms. So I want to make sure that we are on the same page about what those terms mean. So what's the difference? I'm going to give you a scenario that someone helped me with. I just thought it was really helpful. Let's say that you have a process for sending out information about a campaign. I'm not sure why my lighting just went out. Nothing changed here. You guys can still see me, yes? Okay. So let's say you want to send out a mailer or something of that sort about a campaign, a fundraising campaign that your organization is having. And you sent out the letter in the mail. Now, you sent that letter out, but the other alternative is that you could have sent it electronically, right? You could have sent that letter electronically. You didn't have to actually mail it to someone's house. But if you mailed it, you could also put it in like a fancy envelope. You can color code it. You can do something that will actually set it apart from all the other mail that might be coming in. Well, it may be more efficient to email it because you don't have the cost of printing or postage, envelopes, those sorts of things. So it might be more efficient because it's not as many resources or time spent in actually producing that task. But is it effective? Is it going to get caught in someone's email inbox because it's too much clutter? They never really see the email, versus if it went to their home, you have the ability to maybe do some things to make it stand out, right? And so even though it may be more efficient in that it costs you less time or it costs you less resources to perform a task, is it effective? Does it actually have the outcome or the impact that you're looking for? So there is a difference between being efficient and being effective. And when it comes to being more operationally sound, we want both. We don't want to sacrifice effectiveness for efficiency, and we don't want to sacrifice efficiency for effectiveness. We want to find some kind of balance between the two. And I hope that makes sense to you. Now, the other piece to this is it's hard to know if something that you're doing operationally is effective if you don't have a way to tie it to impact. So you know that a task is effective because it is leading to some sort of impact that you want to have within your organization. So when we think about assessing organizations, we think about, and this is a large slide, so I'm going to break this down for you, but we're thinking about 3 different ways or 3 different components that you want to look at when you're actually assessing your organization. You want to look at alignment, you want to look at efficiency, and you also want to look at impact. And one of the things that we talk about when we think about alignment is how is people. Really, it's about people, the work that the people are doing, and not so much the work. It is the work that's being done, but it's how those people are working together. Like org chart. Think about org charts. Our org charts really should be aligned with our strategy. And if our org chart isn't aligned with our strategy, we can't necessarily be operationally efficient or effective, because we may not have the manpower that we need in order for us to really perform well. And what I believe we need to be able to do is to be able to tell the story to our stakeholders. If you can say that we have a need for people to be more aligned with the work we do, and talk about how, people have processes and planning, all these things, this is going to create a narrative that if you're needing capacity building dollars, you should be able to speak that narrative, to write that narrative, to tell that story in such a way where there's an understanding that the budget may need to be different because we're not performing well, right? And sometimes we don't have enough of a narrative to tell to be able to get those extra dollars. So part of the assessment process is to help you tell a narrative. So we want to start with alignment, making sure that there is some alignment with your organization's strategy, your strategic plan, and the actual org structure that's in place. The second piece is we want to look at efficiency. What are the processes that are being used to actually perform the work that needs to be done operationally? Many of you may have a standard operating policy and procedure, which is great. What would even be better is if it was current. And it actually matched the work that we're doing, right? It's one thing to have your SOP and it's written and it's there for, if someone asks you if you have it and you can say, yes, you do. But it's another thing to know that it's current and it actually matches what you're doing today, because that's important. Many times, if we're going to evaluate staff on whether or not they're performing well, we don't have a benchmark as to go back to say you did it right or you did it wrong. So having a standard operating policy and procedure manual that is current helps you to assess even your staff's performance as to whether or not they are doing things correctly. It's a great tool to teach with. It's a great tool for onboarding and training, right? And so having that current makes a difference. The third part of your operational assessment that you want to be able to work on is understanding impact. And remember, as I said earlier, if you don't have a way to measure impact, how do you know you're effective? And so when you think about impact, most of the times I would venture to say that when we talk about impact in our nonprofit world, we generally just think about program outcomes. However, operations leads to outcomes. Operations leads to output. Output leads to outcomes. So let me say that again. Operations leads to outputs. What you do as an organization, the work that everyone puts in leads to an output. And those outputs lead to outcomes. So in many instances, you may not be able to dictate or determine what the outcome is going to be in a community because you have too many variables, right? If a regulation changes, you don't have control over that regulation changing. If there is some sort of civil unrest, you don't have the ability to dictate or determine when civil unrest is going to happen. If there is some sort of political shift, right? We have a new president, for example, in office, and that changes policy. we don't have the ability to dictate how that's going to happen, what changes are going to happen. So that we're kind of limited. We can definitely plan and strategize for outcomes, but we also know that we can't dictate them and determine how we're going to be able to move the dial in our communities. But what we can do is dictate the outputs. We can definitely say from this strategic plan, these are things that I want to accomplish or we want to accomplish as an organization. And these are the outputs that we're going to do, that we want to work toward, that's going to help influence the outcomes. And so impact from an operational standpoint shouldn't just be focused on outcomes in the community. It should be focused on your output as an organization. And when we think about impact, we want to think about planning. And from a planning perspective, it's not just a strategic plan, because that is great. I think everyone should have a strategic plan. I do believe that sometimes we go too long. Like a 5-year strategic plan is very ambitious. When you think about how quickly we're changing, AI is changing. We have all these, again, all these political things that change. And so 5 years from now, that's a whole president change. And so having a strategic plan that's 5 years out, it probably was a great industry standard at one point, but because we're changing and evolving at such a quicker pace, maybe we should think about having shorter strategic plans that we can actually implement, right? And we can see it through. But that's neither here nor there. Having a strategic plan is one thing, but being able to report on your actual outputs that go back into whether or not you're meeting your strategic plan is a part of operational efficiency. So we want to make sure that not only do we have people in the right places, that they're doing the right things, that we're measuring and monitoring the outputs so that we can tie it back to, are we moving in the right direction as an organization? Are we moving in the right direction? Because yes, we could be doing work, but we could just be busy. And when it comes to operations, if we don't have a clear objective and a clear understanding as to where we want to go, we will feel busy and not productive. And that is so very easy for us to do in the nonprofit space, right? That we can get caught up in a lot of emotional work, busy work. Not that it's not meaningful, it just may not be as productive as we need it to be. And so being able to tie the work that you're doing back to your strategic plan and know that we're being evaluated on that, I think makes the difference in an organization that's highly effective and one that's really spinning their wheels. Okay. And so again, we have these 3 areas. We have alignment, which is people and how people work together. And then we have efficiency, which is about the processes. And I include tech in this area, right? Because these days you can't automate processes and not have tech, right? And so I include technology in that whole process piece. And that's how work is performed. And then, of course, you want to also assess impact through planning and what that means, how work is planned, how work is measured, how work is monitored. And so these are the 3 components of an operational assessment that helps organizations create value. Now, one thing that I do want to lift up to you is that we can not negate the impact that culture has on operations. If I were to come to visit any one of you in your organizations, and we talked about your people, we talked about your processes, and we talked about reporting, I may find a lot of similarities in the roles, maybe the names of the roles, right? The titles of job descriptions, and well, titles of roles. I'm not even talking about job descriptions right now, but just the title of roles. I may find that there is and you know what? I feel like I keep looking into the corner because that's where my monitor has all of your faces. So I'm gonna put you at the top, so I'm not looking to the corner. All right, so I want to see your faces. So when it comes to processes, I may go into an organization, they say, oh gosh, yeah, we use Blackbaud, or yeah, we have what's some other systems, maybe some other CRMs. I can't think of any just right off the top of my head, but we might be using QuickBooks. We might be using um, uh, Teams, Microsoft Office platform. We may be using, you can spit out, you can list all of these different technologies that are being used. And you can say, oh yeah, we always have our financial package every month, right? We have our reports every month, and we have some ways that we're monitoring whether or not a campaign is going well. And everyone may speak the same language in that regard, right? There are certain roles that are common to a nonprofit organization, certain software or technology that's, a particular process that's being utilized. And there are specific reports that every board wants to get. And of course, you want to pass your audit. But if I were to go into that organization and dig a little deeper, even though we might have at the surface the same way of talking about things, we are doing something totally different. Totally different. One role, if I were to say, I'm the director of operations at one organization, what that means to another organization might be something totally different. It might be a combination of HR and IT. But at another organization, it's a combination of HR and finance. And another organization, it might be a combination of, 3 different other things and other hats that I haven't even mentioned. If I were to lift back the covers, or pull back the covers, and you said you use Blackbaud, well, someone may be only using Blackbaud for the CRM, and it's not actually connected to their financial management software. It's only connected to the CRM because that's how they bought it and that's how they want to use it. And the reports that they're getting from the system. You can get a system that has 20 different reports, and you may only find that 3 of them are helpful. And that same 3 reports may not be used at any one organization. And so what we're talking about is that each organization has its own personality at the end of the day. So even though you might have some things that are structurally common, what we call administrative operations, they're just structurally common to any organization. How those things are carried out differ from organization to organization. And that is, in a nutshell, the culture that exists in the organization that sits on top of your operations. So we can't negate the fact that culture plays a huge role in how we operate as organizations and as operators. And so I want to bring this to your attention. Hold on, I'm stuck. I'm frozen. Here we go. Where culture meets operations. And this is a biggie because I'm going to read that quote down to at the bottom first. You cannot consistently perform in a manner inconsistent with your beliefs. Culture is, again, the personality of an organization. How many of you have taken, and I would do a poll, but I can't see your faces if I do a poll. I'm a much more relational kind of person, but you might do a show of hands, or you might put up, your hand on your slide. But if you can, how many of you have ever had some kind of personality assessment, like a Myers-Briggs or a DISC assessment, or Enneagram, or any of those things, right? You have those assessments, and they give you all the characteristics of who, how you are typically going to respond in certain situations, and what you're more likely to do or not to do, and how you relate to others. And when you take those assessments, you will find that, I think I agree with 95% of it, but the other 5, I'm probably in another category, because we're people, we're not, robots, we're not in a box. Well, organizations also have personalities. They are prone to having certain beliefs, certain behaviors, and certain practices. Those beliefs are ideas that are accepted as true. They're ideas that are accepted as true. And I'll give you an example of this in just a second. Behaviors are a way of acting based on an idea. And then practices are habits that are formed from those behaviors and become very customary in the performance of the organization. So let me give an example of what I mean by culture meeting operations. If I were to say, and this is probably a common one that I hear, we are a family. How many have heard that before, or even say that? We are a family. Well, if we are a family, that is an idea. That's a belief system that we have as an organization. What might make that a little tricky or difficult from an operations standpoint is that, one, we all have a different idea of what family is. We didn't all grow up in the same house. So if my idea of family is that I really like to spoil my kids, and not to say that, your boss is your parent or your coworker or your the person who reports to you is your child, not saying that at all. But if that is typically how you relate to someone, then you may not be the type of person who can discipline your family. So when things happen in the organization that are not, let's say a family member does something within the organization that should be reprimanded, it's hard to do because you see them as family. So then their behaviors, right? That's a behavior. I don't reprimand because, I want to give you a lot of chances because we're family. Then that leads to practices, right? A habit of letting things slide through the cracks. And then we aren't doing our performance evaluations like we should at a regular interval. We're not giving the right corrective feedback because now we have created a practice based on an idea, a belief. We're family. Having family or considering family or living into the idea that we're a family is fine as long as you kind of nuance that. And so, and I'll give you some examples, some more examples, but think about this. If you think that if this is a belief and the core idea of your organization's culture that we are family, you're not consistently going to perform in a manner inconsistent with that. So when it comes to someone coming in and saying, hey, you've got some issues with performance evaluations, you need job descriptions, you need to hold folks accountable, it's going to be like, does not compute, does not compute, does not compute, because your culture won't let it compute. It won't let it compute. Now, I just saw some folks, if I see someone says admit to the waiting room, I'm just going to click the admit them. I hope that's okay, you guys, because I don't want them just sitting out there. So culture does play a role in how well you can actually transform your operations if you need to. And so I'm going to give you another example or a couple of examples of what I mean by culture meeting operations. Because again, you can assess operations all day long. You can say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to put this in place. But if your culture, because culture is what I call an apex predator, it doesn't have another predator. If your culture does not allow for change, you will not see change. So here's some more examples. All right. So we just talked about we are a family, right? And how that can really derail your operational efficiency. And I'd like to say that you can say we are a family, but nuance it to say we are a work family. Because when you start to nuance it, when you say work family, it helps to understand that this is not the family that I grew up in. This is not necessarily my friend. This is not a friend-based relationship. It's a work-based relationship, right? And so then it starts to change people's perspective of what it is you're trying to accomplish as an organization. Again, this is all about cultural impact on your operations and how you want to make sure that you are aware of what those things are. So here's another one. We are not tech savvy, right? That is a belief that will lead to some behaviors where you don't adopt tech well. And you may have dual processes going on where you have folks who you decided to get this new software and someone's still using your spreadsheet because it's safe. But they believe in their minds it's safe because I'm not tech savvy. That's why it's safe. I'm not tech savvy. And so now you have a behavior of all this dual work where they're, halfway using a system, but they're still writing things down in their notebook or they're using a spreadsheet. And it's not helping because now you develop some practices where we never fully utilize our software or technology. It's always underutilized, maybe 60% adoption at best, right? That's the culture. And you want to nuance that. You want to start saying we are growing with tech. right? So that people start to understand you don't have to be there. You just need to be growing. And you have to have that thought process of, if my culture is hindering me, how do I help people to come out of that belief system so that we can actually achieve some operational success? Here's another one. We are too busy. I had an executive director talk. We're working together, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and she said, listen, I just got to this organization like 2 months ago, and all I keep hearing is, oh, we're too busy. Oh, we're too busy. She's like, I'm just trying to find out what we're too busy doing. She's a new executive director. And she was like, what are we too busy doing? Like, I'm just trying to get simple reports and answers so that I can understand more about who we are, what we do, and how things work here. And every time I'm trying to do something, it's like, we're too busy. Well, what are we too busy doing? And so we had a good laugh about that. And we talked about how she could start changing the narrative to, we're executing the right things at the right times, right? Because at the end of the day, we don't want to be busy. We want to be productive. And if we're busy, are we actually executing the right things at the right times? And so changing that narrative, because again, if you don't change the narrative, you won't be able to see that operational efficiency that you want. Here's another one, last one. We expect too much. There's some times when, and I probably could have named this one a little bit different and said, but we're just a nonprofit. Sometimes there is this expectation that because we're a nonprofit, we don't want to be too corporate, because what too corporate looks like is holding people accountable. And so we don't want to expect too much because we don't want folks to feel like this is corporate. We're here for the cause. Any well-oiled machine has a purpose. So having a purpose does not negate the fact that you need to be a well-oiled machine. And so if you start putting titles and labels on, but we're just a nonprofit, we're expecting too much, then you're also going to have underperformance issues. Because that's almost acceptable, right? Because we're saying it. It's an idea that leads to a behavior. Oh, let's back up. If so-and-so gets too stressed, let's back up. Let's not push the envelope. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't care about our employees' mental health and capacity. What I am saying is that we can't use that as an excuse not to do our best. And in some organizations, the culture of we expect too much is a way to get out of doing what needs to be done. And someone says in the comments, does anyone say, but we're just an S Corp or we're just an LLC? No, no one is saying that. No one is saying that. And so you want to nuance that conversation by saying we're prioritizing right size and right fit roles. Because then it gets out of what is too much for one person. Is it that this person isn't a good fit for the role? Or is it the role isn't a good fit for the organization? Because those are two different things. And so, again, these are all different cultural implications. These are all different types of personalities, if you will, that exist within our organizations that can hinder us from being operationally efficient. And so I wanted you to make sure you have that in the background, because if we start talking about changing operations, this is some of the resistance that you might face. And just for kicks, when we talk about these three components of beliefs, behaviors, and practices, if you want to learn more about that, read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. Because he talks about how small things change behaviors. And that is exactly the way that we at 180 Management Group think about changing and transforming organizations. It is changing practices that will change behaviors over time. And we want to make sure those practices that we're changing align with strategy. And so he talks about one of the examples that he gives that I used to use as well. And occasionally will still do. I just don't work out like I used to. But He talked about how, like, bundling things that you like doing with things you don't like doing. So if I had to exercise, but I like listening to podcasts, that I would use my exercise time to listen to a podcast. That would help me to, change behaviors because I'm adding something I like doing with something I don't like doing, but it gets done. Or another one is, let's say, putting your shoes by the bed, your workout shoes by the bed. So when you wake up, your clothes and your shoes are right there. Some people sleep in their workout clothes. So as soon as they wake up, they're already ready. I never could do that. That's so restricting to me, but that's me. That's my business, as Tab says. So I didn't do that. But you would change the behavior by changing the practice. I have a practice now every night before I go to bed. I get my workout clothes together. Then that is more likely to influence my behavior of working out more regularly, which helps me reach my goal. The strategy was to get fit, right? And so Atomic Habits, I think hands down was a great book, a great read. If you're trying to think through what those things are that you could do as an organization to shift culture, because culture is really about personality and behavior changes, right? So great book. Wanted to throw that out there to you. All right. So now that we've talked about these cultural nuances, this is Madeline asked about, the tool that we use at 180. We recently went through the process of having our what we call an operational assessment tool, copyrighted by the U.S. Copyright Office. And what we decided and what we learned, really, at the end of the day, we've been using this tool for the last 8 years, but what we learned is that you can't transform organizations without transforming culture. So when we come in to do an organizational assessment, we don't only assess operations, we assess culture. We don't only assess operations, which is, we talk about alignment, we talked about efficiency and effectiveness and all those things. We don't go in to just do that because it would be sort of a moot point to come in and do all that assessment about what your policy says and what your processes are if nobody's following because you have a culture that says we don't have to follow them. And so we align the assessment from an operational standpoint to a cultural standpoint, and we produce some information and feedback that we believe is helpful for organizations to be able to make decisions from. And we call that tool the groundwork assessment. And the way that tool works is that we have sort of this large grid, if you will, of like a checklist almost of different tasks that should be performed within certain functions or departments of your organization. And I say functions or departments because if you're a very small outfit, you may not have an HR department, but you should have an HR function, even if it's outsourced to a PEO, professional employment organization, right? And so the HR function should be taking place within your organization, even if it's outsourced. And so we're looking at different departments or functions and making sure that what that department should be doing, that those tasks are being done. So we're looking at HR, finance, IT. We're looking at governance structures, whether or not the governing board has, a training or onboarding process, all those things. We're looking at, risk management processes or policies. And at a high level, because programs are so very specific to an organization, we just look at the programs from a very high level, which is, do you have management software? Is it a lot of automated or manual processes? Do you have the right staff? Do you have staff? And are you measuring and monitoring what those staff members are doing to make sure it ties back into your strategy and your strategic plan? And so we have this huge, if you will, audit checklist that we're looking at. And within that checklist, we're trying to see if, from a people perspective, do you have roles? Do you have job descriptions? All those things. Are people aligned in those functions? We're then going to look at processes for each of those tasks, those functions. And then we're also going to look at what reports are available from those functions. And we have a rating tool that will allow us that will show us whether or not you are more heavily process oriented or more heavily people oriented or more heavily planning oriented, because that is a culture. I will just, there's a whole schematic about this ideal operational culture and all the archetypes that we can, talk about at another time. But for example, if we can probably all understand this one, government agency, where it's all about people, not so much about the processes and planning. It becomes a very politicized culture where it's a very democratic culture where everything has to be voted on by everyone before we move forward. It is the kind of culture that, if you've been here longer, you just have more rights to do things because you've just, you've been at the organization longer than other people have. So it's like, your there's a word, I just can't think of it right now, but your tenure here trumps your actual abilities. And that is a very political kind of culture where the people who are getting, maybe the opportunities to move up in the organization or those who have the best relationships with, senior leaders, it's just politicized. And we don't mean for it to be political. It's just that we're so focused on people and our people happy and our people doing this and our people doing that, that we're not necessarily putting in structure like process and planning. What do I mean by a people process? Well, we used to have this saying, my husband and I, when it comes to developing leaders, is that we don't do politics, we do process. So if you can follow the process to become that next level leader, that's when you get the opportunity to lead in that capacity. But there's a process for that. Have you been vetted? Have you, shown yourself to be someone who can handle the additional responsibility? There's a process for becoming that next level leader. And if it's all about politics, then people get to skip steps and stages, and that causes all sorts of problems within the organization. And so that people-focused organization may be weak in processes and weak in planning, and we call that archetype a government agency because we all know how the government works. And so we do this work, we provide this archetype, but at the end of the day, what we're really trying to accomplish when we do this operational assessment is we're trying to move a culture from stressful to structured. We're trying to move that culture to an ideal state. So let me go back just one more. You see how in the middle, that balance is ideal? That's where you want to be. You want to have equal, what do you call it? Perspective and weight on processes and on people and on planning. You don't want to be unbalanced because those in the imbalances produces certain types of culture that may be problematic for your organization. And so what we're trying to do is balance that organization out by saying, one, let's look at titles, roles, accountabilities are clearly defined. That's what you want to move toward. You also want to move toward systems, tools, policy and procedures that are valued and actually current. You also want to move toward data being available for strategic planning, right? And then you also want to move toward strategic planning that drives priorities. Okay, so this is what, when you're trying to work on this operational assessment and you're looking at all your different departments, what tasks are being done in those departments, whether or not people are in the right places, whether or not you have the right tools, whether or not you have data coming back for reporting, you want to make sure all that is driven by your strategic planning. Like it should match. You shouldn't have and this is, I think, where we really struggle, but you should really have a strategic plan that you can operationalize versus a strategic plan that just really looks good about what you want to accomplish in the community. Most strategic plans that I've seen are focused on outcomes, not outputs. And I think that's a missing step. That is a missing step to efficient operations. So if we're going to be able to do this work, we need to be thinking about our culture and then, of course, our strategic plan. So these are the steps that I wanted to make sure that you have. If you're going to conduct an operational assessment, what you want to do is compare your strategic plan to department goals. This is what we mean by operationalizing your strategic plan. Okay. So do you have effective operations? Well, it depends. Do you have goals that are coming directly from your strategic plan? I don't mean just goals for outcomes in the community. I mean, do you have finance goals, HR goals, IT goals? Do you have goals that are driven by what people can do in specific departments administratively within your organization? And then you want to make sure you can compare a department goal to a department work plan. Okay. So let's say you have a goal, which is to, as an organization, you want to adopt some new tech. Let's just go with that because that's pretty simple. Well, what does that goal look like to adopt a new tech? Is there a particular time frame? Are there particular people who need to use it? Are there particular policies and procedures that need to be developed because of that tech plan? So there should be some kind of work plan to address the goals. And then from there, what operations activities support the work plan? In other words, do people, processes, and planning align with those planned activities? Just as we said, right? Do we have titles and roles or responsibilities? Do we have, I see a question coming up in the chat. Yep, I will. Madeline, we talked about functions and not just departments. So Madeline asked, can you provide guidance for smaller nonprofits who don't have departments because their staff is so small, right? So we kind of talked about that a little bit, which is if you don't have departments, you still have the function. Like you have to have HR function, whether you're a big or large organization, you have to have the function. So if you're hiring people, somebody has to hire those people. Somebody has to make sure that they get onboarded. Somebody has to make sure that they get trained. Somebody has to make sure that they are, they have benefits if you offer benefits, if you don't offer benefits, whatever. So there's an HR component and a function to every organization, no matter how small or large you are. And so we're looking at the tasks, not necessarily whether it's a department, but we're looking at the tasks that need to be performed. So your strategic plan should inform goals. Your goals should inform your work plans. Your work plans should inform your operations activities. And then those operations activities, in order for them to be efficient, you want to make sure that we go back to this. Let's see if it would let me go back. It won't let me go back. Here we go. This is what it looks like to be efficient, right? Operationally efficient, people, policies, people, processes, and planning. This is what you want to look for, right? And that's that step 3. Determine if operations activities support the work plan. People, processes, planning. Those are the pieces. And then this last part is making sure you identify any practices that negatively impact performance, like cultural issues. You want to include that into your assessment. If you don't include that into your assessment, you won't have a plan to overcome it. Sometimes people will say, well, how do I know what that cultural issue that we're having? Well, I'll tell you this, one quick way to identify a cultural issue that you may have. If in the first 90 days you hire someone, they're starting to say the same thing everyone else says. That's a part of your culture. Like if there is something that you say as an organization all the time, and that's an idea, it's a belief that you have within that organization, you're going to hear this new person say it in 90 days. I guarantee it. Thank you. So as a small organization with no employees, we enter in a memorandum of understanding, or what is the MOA? Administration? Probably have to type that out for me. With all our contract workers and consultants. Thank you. Agreement. And this is the thing about that. If you are a small organization and you have an MOA or an MOU, you also want to make sure that those contracts describe who does what. In other words, if they're providing 4 or 5 services to your organization, in order for them to provide that service, what are the inputs they need from your organization to be able to provide that service? If, for example, you have outsourced your accounting or your bookkeeping, you have an outsourced CFO, someone has to provide that person with receipts. Someone has to provide that person with payroll information. Somebody has to provide that person with data so that they can do their job, or at least have access to your data so they can do their job. And that is what you want to control from an operational standpoint, so that your contractors, your independent contractors, and vendors that you use, you are managing them well so that you're spending well. I hope that makes sense. because sometimes we have a tendency to give away all of the work and not hold vendors accountable because they are the experts. When in actuality, yes, they're the experts, but you can't delegate authority. You are responsible and you have authority over your organization, and you can't give that to somebody else. You can make them responsible for the work that they do, but you're still the one who has authority over their organization, and you don't want to give away that authority to a vendor. Okay. So, and yes, a contract alone does not a contractor make. Depending on how the contract is worded, that person could still be ruled an employee from the perspective of FLSA, labor laws, etc. There is some muddy waters there when it comes to those independent contractor agreements, 1099 versus if you're going to give someone, really it's based on how they're structured from a tax perspective as well. So a sole proprietor may get a 1099, but as an S corp, you don't need a 1099 from an S corp, or to give an S corp a 1099 unless your auditor tells you to. But at the end of the day, they're S corp because they have a total different financial or tax structure than someone who's a sole proprietor or independent contractor. So all those nuances, it's on us. It behooves us to know them so that we can make good decisions. And if we know those things, one of the things that we often don't see enough of is that somewhere in your policy book as to how you treat a 1099? What makes them more of an employee that you need to cover under your own policy, workers' comp policy? Because you can have a 1099 that you have to cover under your workers' comp policy, but there are certain practices that you need to make sure that you avoid if you don't want to cover them. So again, can't stress enough. Doesn't matter how small or how large you are, you still need to have certain policies written, certain ways of performing those, or certain ways of monitoring and measuring the performance of certain functions in your organization. Yep. So again, thinking about small organization doesn't mean no SOPs. It just means that the vast majority of the work that goes into the organization may be done by someone else, but you still need an SOP to govern that work. So again, if you're going to do operational assessment, you still need to assess the work that your vendors do in the capacity that they're doing it. So I hope that makes sense to you. And thank you all for such great feedback as well. So I'm going to stop here, I think. Well, one last thing. One thing that I've noticed is that most organizations that struggle, let's say you have 5 or more employees, if you're struggling operationally, a lot of that has to do with, as I said earlier, being able to operationalize a strategic plan. Taking that strategic plan and then breaking it down into actual goals and work plans that can be implemented in the organization. That's where I see the vast majority of the breakdown, is that we have a strategic plan that does not actually, that we're not necessarily living up to at the end of the day. And so creating those work plans for departments or even individuals to be able to come back and say, this is my work plan for my role, and does it fit with my leader's work plan for my role? Those are invaluable strategies for assessing whether or not you're going to have effective operations. And so definitely would say that that is one of the things that I see most often when it comes to, is our organization operating effectively and efficiently? Well, not really, because we don't have a strategic plan that's operational, and we're all kind of doing what we think is best at the moment. And that is also a major concern for burnout. So I did want to let you know that we will be having a workshop on developing work plans here at 180 Management Group. So if anybody's interested in that, I'll make sure that you guys have some information about that. I did want to provide you with a QR code, but this is the QR code, but I don't think you can actually register for it right now. So I'll make sure that Ben and those have that information once it allows you to actually register for the workshop. but this is the workshop we're going to have on cascading goals and developing department work plans. And anyone who needs a work plan can come. So it's not just about being the senior leader. It's about being an employee and trying to be the best employee you can be with having a work plan that matches what your organization is expecting from you. And so we'll be having that workshop on April 5th. It's virtual. It'll be a Zoom. So you can join us. All right. I think that is all the time that I have. This is something that we'll cover in that workshop, which is having an actual template to use. So just putting that out there for you so that you'll get some good information to take back to your organization. So any questions from what we've covered today? I think I have about 5 minutes left to spare.
While folks are putting their questions in the chat box, Miriam, thank you so much. You've given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure everybody else here is saying the same thing. I heard, talking about how our activities are outputs and how outputs influence the outcomes. And I know that output-outcome dichotomy has been, for the entirety of my career, has been the giant question mark. Like, I've never heard a clear answer on what is the connection between outputs and outcomes. We just know it's important, but we're not really quite clear on what it is. The cultural nuances and the need for the cultural nuances is very important. You gave us a good book recommendation on atomic habits. So I'm looking forward to checking that out, and a balance on people, processes, and planning. So thank you for all of this wonderful information and thought leadership here. Looking to see if there are any questions in the chat box. I see some folks are definitely interested in that workshop, and we'll get that information from Miriam and get that out to all of y'all.
I see Madeline's question about, can you do an organizational assessment if you don't have a strategic plan? You can do some form of assessment for sure, but you won't be able to tie it back to strategy, right? So you can just look at whether or not you have processes in place. Yes, you can look at roles and responsibilities, but what makes the sweet spot of being able to say we're efficient in that we're creating value, right? Because if you go back to the definition of operations, it's about creating value. Well, it's hard to create value in operations when there's no strategy. So yes, you can assess, is this good software to use? Well, yeah, but it depends on what you need it for. So again, having a strategic plan is, I think, very, very helpful.
Just had a conversation today with a leader about strategic planning and the sense of, we've invested so much energy into creating a strategic plan that we're all exhausted from that and no longer have any energy to actually implement the thing. And I've seen that happen in so many organizations. So simpler, thoughtful strategic plans can leave you with enough energy to actually do the thing.
Yes. I see some comments about, making sure you have contracts that work for you as well, right? So our contract didn't have a suspension clause. And so they terminated contract. But that's a good point, making sure you have an out in any in any contract, whether it's a 30-day, either party can, get out of this contract with a written notice. Just always have some kind of out in that contract. Going through strategic planning. Yes, I can't say enough. Talk about manpower plans. I know that's not necessarily a term that is a nonprofit centered term, but a manpower plan is basically saying, do we have the staffing? Do we have the bodies that we need to actually have all these, complete these outputs and hopefully achieve the outcomes that we're looking for? So making sure that you're adding that into your strategic planning process, I think, is golden. And how do you shift a culture when it's an ingrained volunteer who has their own desk? Slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Slowly. You slowly change culture when that's the case. Because at some point, someone gave them the idea that that was okay. And now as an organization, you have a responsibility to kind of help them understand and see what is and what isn't okay about the way that they work within your organization. And you do need to be very cognizant of the fact that they didn't get there by themselves, right? And so you want to make sure you're managing that with integrity and with a plan of action. So Okay, I think those are the only questions I saw in the chat. Thank you all so much for allowing me to come and have this time with you. It's been a while since I've been able to present to you guys, but I so enjoy my time with you all here at Together SC. And so thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I would be remiss if I didn't end this call with reminding y'all to check out the Knowledge Network calendar. We've got other upcoming events and learning opportunities on there. So please do check that out, togethersc.org/events. And we've got our nonprofit email marketing roundtable on the 20th, building a board leadership pipeline on the 22nd, and other wonderful things coming up in April and May. So please take a look at those, and we'll see you at the next one.